Karine and Fred met when they were still young, at a time when life was full of dreams and possibilities. She, a dedicated nurse, had a warm smile that lit up the corridors of the hospital where she worked. Fred, on the other hand, was a skilled plumber whose calloused hands told stories of hard and honest work. His easy smile and relaxed demeanour won the sympathy of the clients he served. Their meeting was like a small miracle of everyday life. Fred had been called to fix a leak at the hospital where Karine worked. While he concentrated on tightening a stubborn valve, she hurried down the corridor carrying a tray of medications. It was then that their eyes met for the first time, and something inexplicable happened. Karine felt her cheeks blush, while Fred almost let the wrench slip from his hands. In the days that followed, Fred made up excuses to return to the hospital, claiming routine checks on the pipes. Karine, in turn, started doing extra rounds on that floor, hoping to encounter the friendly plumber again. It didn't take long for them to exchange phone numbers and arrange their first date. After 2 years of dating, they decided to get married in a simple ceremony, surrounded by close family and friends. The party was held in the backyard of Karine's parents' house, with decorations made by themselves and a cake decorated by Fred's aunt. What they lacked in luxury, they made up for in love and joy. The first years of marriage were marked by a lot of work and saving. They lived in a small rented apartment, saving every penny they could to make the dream of owning a house come true. Fred continued as a self-employed plumber, responding to calls at any time of the day or night. Karine continued in nursing, doing extra shifts whenever possible. As time went by, their efforts began to bear fruit. Fred, always visionary, realised he could expand his services. With the savings they had set aside and a small loan, he opened his own repair and maintenance company. Initially, it was just him and an old van, but gradually he started gaining clients and building a solid reputation in the city. Karine, on the other hand, received an offer to work as a sales representative for a pharmaceutical brand. The opportunity came after one of the doctors at the hospital, impressed with her knowledge and charisma, recommended her for the position. She hesitated initially, fearing to leave nursing, but Fred encouraged her to accept the new challenge. The change in Karine's career brought new experiences for the couple. The salary was considerably higher, and she began attending more refined environments at corporate dinners and pharmaceutical industry events. At first, Fred quickly realised that he would not feel comfortable in that world so different from his own. "Karine, I think it's better if you go to these events alone," Fred said one evening. "I would feel like a fish out of water there, and I'm afraid I might end up embarrassing you." "Are you sure, love? I don't want you to feel left out," she said, tenderly touching her husband's face. "I'm sure," Fred replied with a sincere smile. "You deserve to shine in this new world of yours, and I would only get in the way. Besides, I can use those nights to catch up on work at the company." From that moment on, Karine began attending corporate events alone. At first, when asked about her personal life, she would deflect or change the subject. This subtle change in her behaviour did not go unnoticed by Fred. He noticed that Karine no longer talked much about her colleagues or the events she attended. When he asked how a particular dinner had gone, he received vague and evasive responses. "It was good as always, nothing special," she would say, quickly changing the subject. Fred felt a pang of sadness, but assumed it was just the natural result of the different paths their careers had taken. He focused more and more on his own company, which was growing steadily, demanding more of his time and energy. Meanwhile, Karine found herself increasingly immersed in a world of appearances and status. Her colleagues, mostly single and independent women, talked about expensive restaurants, exotic trips, and complicated relationships with executives. Karine found herself comparing her life to theirs, feeling a confusing mix of pride and shame. Pride because she had a faithful, hard-working and loving husband like Fred. Shame because he didn't fit the sophisticated standard her new social circles valued. This internal conflict ate away at her, causing her to become emotionally distanced from both work and home. One particularly difficult night, after a corporate dinner where she was insistently questioned about her personal life, Karine came home to find Fred asleep on the couch. He had waited for her, with dinner ready on the table and a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked on his way back from work. The sight of that simple and loving scene brought tears to her eyes. "What am I doing?" she thought, sitting next to her husband and gently stroking his hair. Fred slowly opened his eyes, smiling when he saw her. "Hi, love. How was the dinner?" he asked, still sleepy. Karina hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of all the omissions and half-truths she had been telling. It was like always," she replied, forcing a smile. In the days that followed, Karine found herself increasingly divided between two worlds. At home with Fred, she felt loved and safe. At work and social events, she lived a constant act, omitting important parts of her life and feeling more and more disconnected from herself. This duality reached its peak on a Friday night during an important business dinner at one of the most elegant restaurants in the city. Karine was seated at the table with colleagues and potential clients, all impeccably dressed and talking about international travel and investments. "And you, Karine? Are you dating anyone?" one of the executives asked. Karine felt her heart race. For a moment she considered telling the truth, talking about Fred and the love they shared. But the fear of not being understood, of being judged, spoke louder. "Oh, my personal life is complicated," she replied, feeling a knot form in her throat. "Very focused on my career. You know how it is." The people at the table nodded understandingly, and the conversation moved on to other topics. Karine, however, felt deeply uncomfortable with the lie she had just told. It was as if she had betrayed not only Fred, but herself. As the night progressed, Karine excused herself and went to the bathroom, needing a moment alone to gather herself. Upon arrival, however, she found the door closed with a sign indicating it was under maintenance. "Sorry, ma'am, but we had a problem with one of the toilets," explained a restaurant employee. "A technician is working and should be finished any moment now." Karine nodded, resigned, and decided to wait. A few minutes later, she heard a familiar voice coming from inside the bathroom. Her heart skipped a beat upon recognizing Fred's deep and kind tone. "All done here. The bathroom is ready," said Fred, emerging from the room carrying his toolbox. Karine's eyes widened in surprise. "Fred? What are you doing here? Why isn't one of your employees here?" she asked, looking around nervously to see if any of her colleagues were nearby. Fred smiled upon seeing his wife, but immediately noticed her worried expression. "Hi, love. The employee on duty today said it was his son's birthday, so I told him he could enjoy the day with his family and decided to handle this emergency call myself," he explained. "Oh, Fred, you really do have a soft heart," she said, giving her husband a loving smile. At that moment, some of her colleagues approached, asking if the bathroom was already available. "Yes, I was just informing this lady that the service is completed," he said, pretending not to know his wife. Karine felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. There stood Fred, the man she loved, pretending to be a stranger to protect her from her own lie. Shame and regret hit her with full force. At that moment, as if a veil had been removed from her eyes, Karine clearly saw how lost she had become in her pursuit of acceptance and status. She saw the honourable, hard-working and kind husband she had by her side, a man who had built a company from scratch and still found time to help others. With tears in her eyes, Karine did something she should have done a long time ago. "Ladies," she said, turning to her colleagues, "I would like to introduce you to my husband, Fred." The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Fred looked at Karine with a mixture of surprise and love, while her colleagues processed the information. "Your husband?" one of them asked, confused. "This is really a surprise." To Karine's surprise, her colleagues did not react with disdain or judgment. On the contrary, they showed curiosity and even admiration for the couple's story. "So you are the owner of that maintenance company that everyone recommends?" one of them asked Fred, who nodded modestly. The conversation flowed in a surprisingly natural manner. Fred, with his simple and charismatic way, soon captured the group's sympathy. Karine watched, amazed, how her husband stood out, not for the sophistication of his clothes or the status of his job, but for the genuineness of his character. At the end of the night, when they were finally alone, Karina hugged Fred tightly. "Forgive me," she whispered, with a choked voice. "I was so foolish." Fred hugged her back, kissing her forehead gently. "There is nothing to forgive, my love. We all lose our way sometimes. The important thing is to find the way back." That night marked a new beginning for Karine and Fred. In the days and weeks that followed, Karine made a point of introducing her husband to all her colleagues and clients. To her surprise and joy, Fred was received with genuine respect and admiration in her professional circle. More than that, Karine rediscovered the pleasure of being herself, without masks or pretensions. She realized that her strength did not come from status or appearances, but from the integrity and love she shared with Fred. The couple began attending corporate events together, with Fred often stealing the spotlight with his funny stories and practical advice on building maintenance. Karine watched, with a heart full of pride and gratitude, as her husband lit up any room with his genuine and warm presence. At home, their connection grew even stronger. The nights were filled with honest conversations about their days, their dreams, and their fears. Years later, when Karine looked back on that night at the restaurant, she no longer felt shame or regret. On the contrary, she saw that moment as a turning point, the instant when she chose authenticity over appearances, love over status. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.